These are the spy submarines that changed Cold War espionage forever, conducting underwater intelligence operations so classified that their own families had no idea what they were doing. For over 3 decades, American nuclear submarines silently prowled enemy waters during Operation Ivy Bells and other submarine espionage missions, tapping underwater cables, stealing Soviet submarines from the ocean floor, and conducting intelligence operations so sensitive that only presidents and select National Underwater Reconnaissance Office officials knew the truth about these vessels that risked everything for strategic advantage. The story begins with a simple observation that revolutionized submarine espionage forever. In 1966, Captain James F. Bradley, Jr., a World War II submarine veteran and chief of naval undersea intelligence, remembered something from his childhood along the Mississippi River. He'd seen warning signs telling boaters not to anchor near underwater cables. If American rivers had such warnings, Bradley figured the Soviets probably used similar markers. And if they did, those signs would lead him right to the most valuable intelligence target of the Cold War: Soviet underwater communication cables. Bradley's hunch paid off, launching what would become Operation Ivy Bells. U.S. intelligence had learned of an undersea communications cable in the Sea of Okhotsk, connecting the major Soviet Pacific Fleet naval base at Petropavlovsk on the Kamchatka Peninsula to the Soviet Pacific Fleet's mainland headquarters at Vladivostok. This wasn't just any cable. This was the underwater highway for some of the Soviet Union's most sensitive naval communications, as later documented in the definitive submarine espionage book, Blind Man's Bluff, by Sherry Sontag and Christopher Drew. The Sea of Okhotsk sat squarely in Soviet territorial waters, strictly off-limits to foreign vessels. The Soviet Navy had installed a network of SOSUS-style sound detection devices along the seabed to catch intruders. The area buzzed with constant naval exercises, surface ships, and submarine patrols. Getting there undetected would require a submarine unlike anything the Navy had ever used before. Enter the USS Halibut, a vessel with one of the most unusual careers in submarine espionage history. Originally designed as a nuclear-powered guided missile submarine, Halibut got recommissioned in the late 1960s for something far more secretive under National Underwater Reconnaissance Office control. The Navy ripped out her missile systems and installed a massive pressurized chamber they called the Bat Cave. This compartment could house saturation divers who could work at depths of 400 feet for hours at a time using revolutionary helium-nitrogen breathing mixtures. In October 1971, Halibut began her most daring submarine espionage mission yet. Operation Ivy Bells would become one of the most successful underwater intelligence operations of the Cold War, and one of the most dangerous. The submarine had to travel thousands of miles through hostile waters, locate a specific cable on the vast ocean floor, and somehow tap into Soviet communications without being detected by the extensive SOSUS network. The underwater cable tapping technology required was staggering. At 400 feet below the surface, ordinary scuba divers could only survive for minutes. Halibut's saturation divers used revolutionary helium-nitrogen mixture-breathing science that allowed them to work underwater for hours without risking nitrogen narcosis. They were among the first in the world to utilize deep-water diving techniques that submarine espionage teams still use today. When Halibut finally reached the cable site in the Sea of Okhotsk, 120 miles off the Soviet coast, the real submarine espionage work began. In complete darkness at the bottom of the ocean, Navy divers emerged from the Bat Cave and walked along the seafloor. They located the Soviet cable and attached a 20-foot-long AN/WLR-6 waterbuoy wiretapping device that wrapped around the cable without piercing its casing. The sophisticated device captured everything passing through the underwater communication line. What Operation Ivy Bells discovered exceeded their wildest expectations. The first submarine espionage tapes revealed that the Soviets were so confident in their cable's security that most conversations were completely unencrypted. As the authors of Blind Man's Bluff described it, the mission was like the United States placing a glass against the Soviet Union's wall to hear their every word. The underwater intelligence was extraordinary. American analysts could listen to Soviet naval communications about submarine deployments, missile tests, and strategic nuclear planning. They even intercepted personal phone conversations between Russian officers and their wives, mistresses, and colleagues. But the most valuable submarine espionage intelligence concerned Soviet nuclear capabilities and their genuine fears about potential conflict with the United States. The Operation Ivy Bell's success led to an even more ambitious submarine espionage plan. TNT's Bell Laboratories designed a massive 6-ton nuclear-powered device called the Beast. This sophisticated underwater wiretap used radioisotope thermoelectric generators and could record weeks of conversation across multiple lines simultaneously, storing a year's worth of intelligence data. In 1972, Halibut divers replaced the original tap with this technological marvel. For nearly a decade, Operation Ivy Bells provided unprecedented insight into Soviet military thinking through submarine espionage. The underwater cable intelligence helped American negotiators during the Strategic Arms Limitation talks, known as SALT II. From the submarine espionage tapes, government officials learned a groundbreaking truth. The Soviets were just as afraid of nuclear war as the Americans were. This intelligence fundamentally changed how the United States approached arms control negotiations and may have indirectly contributed to ending the Cold War. But Halibut wasn't the only submarine conducting these dangerous espionage missions. The USS Parche, a Sturgeon-class submarine commissioned in 1974, became America's premier spy submarine. During her 30-year submarine espionage career and 19 deployments, Parche earned more awards than any vessel in U.S. Navy history: 9 Presidential Unit citations, 10 Navy Unit commendations, 13 Navy Expeditionary Medals, and 15 Battle Efficiency Awards. Officially, this Sturgeon-class submarine was recovering Soviet missile fragments from test launches. In reality, Parche's primary missions involved setting and retrieving wiretaps on Soviet underwater communication cables in locations from the Sea of Okhotsk to the Barents Sea. The submarine espionage dangers were constant and terrifying. During one mission, the USS Seawolf got stranded on the ocean bottom during a storm and nearly had to activate self-destruct charges to prevent capture. On another underwater operation, Halibut began drifting upward, while saturation divers were still connected by air hoses. The men watched helplessly as the submarine pulled away, knowing they would die if dragged to the surface too quickly, but would suffocate if they cut themselves loose. Meanwhile, another submarine operation was capturing global attention, though few knew its true espionage purpose. Project Azorian was supposedly a deep-sea mining operation by reclusive billionaire Howard Hughes. In reality, it was an $800 million CIA mission to recover a sunken Soviet submarine from the Pacific Ocean floor using the purpose-built ship Hughes Glomar Explorer. The target was K-129, a Soviet ballistic missile submarine that had sunk in 1968, about 1,560 miles northwest of Hawaii. The K-129 submarine lay 16,500 feet below the surface, far deeper than any previous recovery attempt. The CIA wanted the submarine's nuclear warheads, codebooks, and communication equipment. While the Project Azorian recovery partially succeeded, much of the Soviet submarine broke apart during the lifting operation. Project Azorian remains one of the most expensive submarine espionage operations in history, costing over $5 billion in today's dollars. These extraordinary submarine espionage successes came to a devastating end through betrayal. Ronald W. Pelton, a 44-year-old NSA analyst, fluent in Russian, found himself $65,000 in debt and facing bankruptcy in 1980. On January 15, 1980, Pelton walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., and offered to sell American submarine espionage secrets, making his betrayal even more damaging than the infamous John Walker spy ring. Pelton had no documents to steal, but he possessed something equally valuable: a photographic memory and encyclopedic knowledge of NSA submarine espionage operations. He met with KGB officer Vitaly Yurchenko and provided detailed reports of U.S. underwater surveillance activities, including Operation Ivy Bells. For revealing the submarine espionage program, the KGB paid Pelton just $5,000. For additional intelligence provided between 1980 and 1983, he received $35,000 total. The consequences for submarine espionage were immediate and catastrophic. In 1981, surveillance satellites showed Soviet warships anchored over the Operation Ivy Bells wiretap site in the Sea of Okhotsk. The Soviets had found and recovered the American underwater surveillance device. Years of submarine espionage intelligence gathering ended in a single betrayal. By 1999, the captured American wiretap was on public display at the Great Patriotic War Museum in Moscow. Pelton might have escaped detection, but in 1985, KGB Colonel Vitaly Yurchenko defected to the United States and revealed Pelton's identity. Pelton was arrested, tried, and convicted of espionage in 1986. He received 3 concurrent life sentences, plus 10 years. Prosecutors called the case more serious than the John Walker spy ring because of the sensitivity of compromised submarine espionage information. Pelton was released in 2015 after serving nearly 30 years and died in 2022, reportedly bitter and full of regret. But submarine espionage didn't end with the Cold War. Today, the USS Jimmy Carter, one of 3 Seawolf-class submarines, continues this legacy of underwater intelligence gathering. At over 350 feet long with a submerged displacement of more than 9,100 tons, the Seawolf class represents the most expensive attack submarines ever built, costing more than $3 billion each. Jimmy Carter features a 100-foot multi-mission platform that can deploy Navy SEALs and remotely operated vehicles for modern submarine espionage operations. The submarine has additional maneuvering devices that allow precise positioning over underwater fiber optic cable targets. Intelligence experts speculate the platform serves as an underwater splicing chamber for fiber optic cables. In 2013, Jimmy Carter received a Presidential Unit Citation for Mission 7, described as extremely difficult and hazardous operations of vital importance to national security. The Seawolf-class submarine has been photographed returning to port, flying the Jolly Roger in 2017. The traditional signal among submarine crews that an espionage mission was successfully completed. The relevance of submarine espionage capabilities has only grown. Since 2015, Russian submarines and spy ships have been detected near underwater fiber optic cables vital to global internet communication. Reports of Russian spy ship activity near the U.S. nuclear submarine base at Kings Bay, Georgia, suggest ongoing interest in American underwater communication systems. As submarine espionage expert W. Craig Reed notes, submarines absolutely still have the capability to do these kinds of missions, and there are personnel that are still trained on how to do these submarine espionage operations. The submarine espionage operations of the Cold War represent some of the most daring and technologically sophisticated underwater intelligence gathering in history. For decades, American spy submarines and their crews risked their lives in enemy waters, often with families who had no idea where their husbands, sons, and brothers were going or what submarine espionage missions they were conducting. They developed revolutionary saturation diving technology, created sophisticated underwater wiretapping equipment, and executed submarine espionage missions that provided crucial intelligence during the most dangerous period of the Cold War. These silent submarine espionage warriors operated in a world where discovery meant certain death or international incident. They mapped enemy waters inch by inch, stole secrets from the ocean floor, and gathered underwater intelligence that may have prevented nuclear war. Their success wasn't measured in battle victories, but in conversations intercepted through submarine espionage, cables tapped in operations like Ivy Bells, and secrets stolen from the depths of hostile seas. The legacy of Operation Ivy Bells and submarine espionage continues today, reminding us that the most important battles of the Cold War weren't fought on land or in the air, but in the silent depths of the ocean by spy submarines whose very existence remained classified for decades after their underwater espionage missions ended.